Did we do well, my darling girls? Did we really do well? We grew you up to be straight and strong, to do your best to know right from wrong.
Today, as you know, we're speaking to Stephanie Davies-Arai and to Heather Brunskill-Evans. Stephanie Davies-Arai is the founder and director of Transgender Trend and was shortlisted in 2018 for the John Maddox Prize for her school guides, supporting gender diverse and trans-identified students in school. She's also a communication skills expert, a teacher trainer, a parent coach, and author of a book called Communicating with Kids, an experienced speaker on parenting, feminism, and transgender children. Stephanie was an intervener in the High Court last week in support of Keira Bell, a detransitioner, and also Mrs. A, the parent of a 15-year-old girl, who brought a landmark case against the Tavistock Gender Identity Development Service in a claim that under 18s are not old enough to consent to the radical treatment meted out to children designated transgender. And Stephanie was there in court and will tell us all about it. Heather Brunskill-Evans is also here. She was also there in court. She's joined us before for an Object-in-R, and she's on our management committee here at Object. She's an academic who didn't sell out, who had the temerity to say, very sweetly and clearly, that which absolutely cannot be said, that transitioning children is child abuse. Heather has proved too radical for Radio 4, too radical for the Women's Equality Party. Academia contained her, but she decided to retire in the end. She'd had enough. None of it stopped her in any way, and we're delighted to have her here today to help launch her new book, Transgender Body Politics. I've read it, and I'd say that it does for gender critical thought what Kimberly Crenshaw did for intersectionality, makes it unavoidable. So we're going to start now, and I'd like to turn to Stephanie and ask us tell us a little bit about the court case.
Wow, where do I start?
Maybe you could start saying what it was about, what a judicial review is, how you got involved, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, a judicial review is brought really when there's all other options have been tried and no change or has been affected. So it's the last step on a journey really. And the claimants, Keira Bell and Mrs. A, the daughter of the mother of a 16-year-old daughter who has autism, brought the case. Or in fact, initially it was Sue Evans, a psychiatrist ex-Tavistock, brought the case against the Tavistock GIDS, and the claim was that under 18s are do not have the capacity to consent to the treatment of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. And the overview of the case was, it was a relief really to sit in a courtroom and hear all of the issues put out there without any of the ideological language around it, without any of the ideology coming in. So I don't think we heard the words transgender or gender identity or non-binary or any of those kind of, any of that ideological justification for the treatment. What we were back to was, this is a clinical service. What is the clinical justification for this treatment? So a lot of what we heard, it was very stark. It was sort of thrown into stark relief what we are actually doing, and without being sort of adorned with all of the sort of ideological justification for it. Real relief actually just to hear all the facts and evidence laid out in a quite dispassionate and objective way in a courtroom.
Yeah. Did you feel that all the evidence had been laid out? Because I wondered why things like social contagion and Munchausen's syndrome by proxy, which are all just as valid a concept as transgenderism, I didn't hear them mentioned. I don't know if I was in the overflow room and couldn't hear very well. Did they get covered?
Well, not teenage girls were mentioned. The unprecedented rise in the number of adolescents, particularly girls, was mentioned in our evidence. We weren't looking at any sort of suppositions about why it was happening, such as Munchausen's. That we didn't go into those areas. It was very, very factual and evidence-based. So all of those issues, in fact, my intervention, and the reason that I felt it was important to intervene, was that they are more cultural considerations. So what's the cultural context within which this is happening? Because I think it's because our evidence was top quality, robust evidence, hundreds and hundreds of pages of it.
Yeah.
But it didn't go in slightly, but not so much into the cultural context within which these children are being taught that they have a gender identity and that overrides their biological sex, and how young people are seeing this online, on Tumblr and YouTube videos and Reddit, etc., and also in schools, and in fact everywhere they look in the media, that this is the new truth. And so the context of why that children and adolescents are coming to the clinic already with the absolute established belief, in the case of girls, that they really are boys, and they're literally boys because they identify as boys. And I thought that the cultural context was really, really critical for this case. And in fact, my barrister, when he gave the oral evidence on behalf of Transgender Trend, made the legal point that when you're considering the capacity to consent, the environment of the child is taken into account. And he cited the case of a child that had been brought up in a family of Jehovah's Witnesses, and how that had influenced the child's capacity to understand what they were consenting or not consenting to. And he made the point that the wider cultural context that our children are being brought up in should also be considered, not just the family influence, but the wider culture, which I think is correct, because these children are not being brought up in a cultural bubble. They're not being brought up outside of their culture, and they are not in some way magically immune to all the influences that this generation are getting in terms of gender identity and exploring their gender identity, and all of these new things that have suddenly been presented to this generation as essential tasks.
Yes, it did seem. I mean, obviously you had loads of evidence to present, and I thought there were some omissions. Emma Grover's mentioned in the chat that she thought that watchful waiting wasn't mentioned. Did you hear that mentioned? That should have been the Tavistock's policy and used to be.
Yeah, you have to remember our QC had, I think he gave evidence for about 2.5 hours. Really fantastic, but our evidence and our witness statements run to hundreds of pages. So all of the evidence is in there, and the judges, there were 3 judges, which I think is quite unusual, but I think reflects the seriousness of this case. They had read through all of the witness statements very carefully. And they stated that they already knew, and they will go away and they will no doubt read through them all again.
Yeah, so yeah, we have to allow for that.
All of the evidence is in there. Obviously, our QC could not repeat every single thing in the presentation in the time that he had.
I think that's quite an important point, because we tend to think that it will be judged on the evidence that was presented over the 2 days, but because this is a judicial review, they also go away and do a lot of reading before they make up their minds, and this is the reason why we won't hear for a few weeks. I should have said, if anybody wants to direct a question to Stephanie or Heather, please put your hand up, and Rebecca or I will come to you. And if you've got a question that you'd like us to pose, then just please put it in the chat, and we'll do our best to do that. So what did you think of the defence, Stephanie?
Well, that was the other side, where the information stark and unadorned, and I found it. I think we've probably all seen interviews of various Tavistock clinicians on TV and heard them on the radio, and the evidence presented was similar to that, really. And the judges would ask, where is your evidence for this? Where are the stats? Where's the study? And invariably there wasn't one. There was a lot of talk about experienced endocrinologists who know this, but the lack, the paucity of evidence to back up the claims made really stood out for me. And again, it was, although I already know all of this, to hear it in a courtroom was fairly shocking, really.
Yes, yes. It was shocking in a negative sort of way, wasn't it? I mean, I'd love to ask you what were the sort of big moments for you. I was quite struck by the male judge who asked 3 times, so are you telling this 10-year-old she will never be a mother? And he didn't get a straight answer, and he asked it again, and he asked it again.
Well, one example of when you strip away the ideology, how it's sort of thrown into stark relief what's really happening, was the example used by the barrister for UCL, and who were intervening. And he was talking about a 10-year-old girl who hated her periods. And I think I think in the past I'd always made the assumption that 10-year-olds who were going on to puberty blockers must be Tanner stage 2, but he was talking about starting periods, so that 10-year-old girl was Tanner stage 4, which means that she'd started puberty probably at age 9, and so the girls who start puberty earlier are particularly vulnerable to this for all sorts of reasons that that are really obvious. But so that example, what was so shocking was the statement that this is the only alternative. Puberty blockers are the only treatment and there is no alternative. So you're looking at a 10-year-old girl who hates having periods, whose friendship group, whose peer group are still children. She's in year 5 or year 6 at primary school.
I was that child, I know.
So, yeah, she looks like she's starting to look like a young woman, and womanhood has come upon her childhood suddenly, and she, of course, does not know how to cope with that, and she's not emotionally ready for developing so early, and so of course she's going to get comments by the other kids. She's going to get a lot of sniggering. She's going to be in a really, really difficult position, and menstruation, of course, is uncomfortable. It's embarrassing, humiliating, excruciating or can be. I think some 10-year-old girls might sail through that, but I think generally, I think the majority of 10-year-olds would find that incredibly difficult. They're somehow suddenly marked out as different to their peer group, and so you're just imagining this poor 10-year-old girl who hates her periods is offered puberty blockers and told there is no alternative.
I'd have had them.
So that was a real that really brought me up short, because that brought it into.
And the thing that got me about that was, if they're going to have that discussion, I mean, when you're that girl, all you can think about is getting on with life and surviving your periods. You are not going to want to think about being a mother, and they've got to discuss that with you if they're going to put you on puberty blockers, and it's the last thing you're going to want to engage with.
And we all know the various ways that adolescent girls try not to become women. The anorexia disorders, the anorexia, the self-harming. We know that this is a particularly difficult. I think it's a difficult time for boys and girls, and it's a crisis time in identity formation. And but I think for girls there are specific issues, and in fact this is what my intervention was based on. There are specific issues for girls that and it's not, the service doesn't differentiate between boys and girls. It's a kind of gender neutral service where lots of a pause button, and and there's a, you know, that there is a failure to look at the distinct experience of girls at puberty.
That's right. And the thing that struck me about that was when he made his point about the if the boys are offered puberty blockers too early, then the penis hasn't got big enough to make an effective vagina, whatever you think of that process, later. That must mean that the boys are being let go a little later, so it's actually more of an issue for girls.
Yes, we don't know this, but he did say a boy might be encouraged to wait until age 14, and so you know, we don't know, but it does suggest that maybe the children who are taking puberty blockers at the youngest ages are girls, and so that there are issues there. The difference between boys and girls, there are really specific issues culturally, physically, biologically, and yet they're not, you know, the actual treatments are not, that isn't taken into account.
That's right. I just like to say, we've got a lot of people in the chat saying how awful periods were for them, but there was one person who said in her school it had quite high status and was quite positive, so which is how it should be, shouldn't it? It should be we accept turning into an adult person, and we have sympathetic and understanding treatment, and we, you know, we have things in common with each other. It's you know, it doesn't have to be like this. But it's such a male-dominated culture in a mixed school, particularly, I would imagine. I went to a girls' school; it wasn't so bad. But,
well, I would say there's an awful lot we can do before we get to the stage of puberty.
Absolutely, and some of us did it for our children, and some people obviously haven't got a clue, and that's work with parents, isn't it? So, what was the highlight for you, Stephanie, over the 2 days? Would you say?
The highlight, I think, was just simply hearing all of the evidence that we had such an excellent team, excellent witness statements, the really highest quality, and to hear all those facts stated dispassionately in court. I think that was the overall highlight. We can't, and also the excellence of our QC and our presentation. It was a joy to listen to. Also, I think I mean, it sounds stupid, of course they're intelligent, but the intelligence of the judges, I think we had very high quality, as you would expect. That perhaps should go without saying, but it was a reassurance to see the careful questioning and obvious care and attention that the judges were paying to the issues and to the statements.
Could you say a bit about what the female judges were saying? Because in the overflow rooms where all the journalists and supporters were, we couldn't really hear the female judges because the sound system was so awful.
They were asking.
The male judge ask his very sort of percipient questions.
Well, they were asking very pertinent questions. A lot of the questions were, so where is your evidence? Where's your study for that? Can you let us know what the stats are for that? You know, those kind of questions were asked to the Tavistock barrister. I think our QC spoke for 2.5 hours with no interruption at all, actually, when I think about it, that he was so good.
Yes, well, he stuck to the point, didn't he, and laid out his case,
And everything he said was backed up by evidence. So those kind of questions. The questions to our QC were more about how does this work in practical terms? How do you, you know, the child wants the treatment, the doctor agrees, the parents agree. How do you envisage this practically happening in a court, in a family court? So they went into some of the sort of logistics and practical details, and also other sort of court cases that I don't know about, like Montgomery. Very sort of technical legal issues that I didn't really understand.
Because they seem to make a lot of play about the Gillett case, which I didn't think was directly comparable. It was when teenagers get to make a decision, but the Gillett case was about a teenager who wants to be sexually active being able to access contraception without parental consent. And to me, that's about protecting a teenager. Whatever you think about the sexual activity, you're protecting a teenager from unwanted pregnancy. So I thought that was completely different, because puberty blockers are actually causing harm to the child, not protecting them from anything except something that's allegedly in their head. I didn't think it was.
I think Gillett commented. I think Gillick competence is used as a sort of benchmark for all sorts of all sorts of different cases. I think, you know, Gillick competence is used, but it's capacity to consent. And my part of my intervention was the fact that these young people are cannot be fully informed, partly because the clinicians and the professionals themselves are not fully informed about long-term effects of treatments, but also because these young people come to the clinic already with this understanding that's been drilled into them everywhere they look, that they have a gender identity, and that there's nothing done to challenge that model of understanding, and children are not told that that's one way of understanding gender. It's something that it's a belief that some people hold. There are other beliefs about gender and sex, and girls aren't even told the feminist theories of gender. So the theories of gender of their own sex are withheld from them.
Yeah.
So they're not, to me, unless you're given a full range of beliefs about gender and sex, you are not fully informed, and you cannot be.
Yeah. I should stop and ask Rebecca if anyone's got their hand up and wants to ask Stephanie a question. Rebecca, is there anybody we need to bring in at the moment?
I don't see any hands up at the moment, but if anyone does want to press the little hand button, we can.
Okay, do press the little hand button if you'd like.
One person does have. Sinead does.
Is that a Sinead?
Yes.
If you could bring her in, please.
Sinead, if you unmute yourself, we should be able to hear you.
Unmute, that's a helpful little button as well. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And obviously we want to stick with the court case as much as possible. But the recent change for the Department of Education, that was the statement about nobody's born in the wrong body, and then how that goes on to mermaids and Stonewall and Bonewall backpedaling. How is this likely to affect the young people that are caught in the middle of this now? I assume most of your audience are parents or people who work in it who are extremely worried, possibly like myself, completely ostracised. You know, the mermaids and Stonewall are apparently their support organisations, and now they've backpedalled so badly. Where does that leave these young people?
Yeah, well, absolutely. We'll see what Stephanie's got to say about that.
It's the reason I focused on providing alternative guidance for schools, because I think it's what I'm talking about, of young people arriving at the Tavistock already having beliefs that have been instilled in them as and presented to them in schools as fact,
and sort of ring fenced in such a way that you cannot offer any alternative narrative at all because you're immediately demonized.
And that's part of the teaching. It's absolutely what young people understand, that to question this makes you a bigot and a transphobe. So children learn that along with us adults. Children know that as well. Young people know that. I think. So my work has been to stop it at its root. The root.
It's fantastic, the transgender trend guidance, and it's you know, the parents have got, some of the schools have already started to change the guidance because of parental pressure, and you know, it's starting to happen really quickly. But you know, I'm worried the more we do, the people who are stuck in this have got increasingly less places to turn.
I know that our schools guide is being used in schools across the UK, and it's what keeps me going actually when things are looking bad. I think at a school somewhere, you know, somewhere near you, a school is using our guide and finding it really useful, and some whole school areas are using our guide, and nobody can do anything about that.
I mean, all the schools with Stonewall, my child is completely brainwashed by Stonewall.
Yeah,
it just changed within a few weeks of having these sessions in school.
And that's the story we hear all the time. My child started thinking that they were transgender after a session by Gendered Intelligence or by Stonewall or mermaids. I think schools are going to have to balance what they've already taught children in light of the new DFE guidance. in fact, the only schools guidance that is compatible with the new DfE guidance is the Transgender Trend Schools Pack. So the guidance gives parents a way in, you know, of giving their schools our pack and saying this is compatible. And the other organisations who provide, I mean, I did put out a blog about the guidance that's out there that is now in breach of the DfE guidance. We have to remember that the DfE guidance is specifically for relationships and sex education, but you can't have policies elsewhere in the school that are in breach of that guidance. So I think that's given parents a great way in to their schools to challenge what they've already been teaching children, and to get us in, or to get, you know, some alternative teaching. So, because the other thing about the DfE guidance was its emphasis on the 1996 Education Act, which states that it prevents children from being politically indoctrinated. And if they're learning gender identity as fact, that is political indoctrination, because what children are learning is trans women are women. That's a political belief. It's a political viewpoint. Unless they get a balance to that, they are in breach of the 1996 Education Act. So that was another, you know, so I think schools now must bring in some teaching that challenges gender identity.
I think that's a very good point. A lot of people are saying in the chat about the close links to eating disorders. And I know, Abigail, you've mentioned this several times. If you'd be willing to come in and speak about it, I think that would be a good thing. This is somebody saying you're diagnosed with all sorts of things, you know, and so apparently in Sweden, a lot of the eating disorder clinics will refer people to a gender identity clinic, because it's an easier way out than destroying yourself by not taking food, isn't it? It looks like a positive option. Horrendous, absolutely horrendous. My daughter works in one. I know, I hear stories about how awful and how self-destructive those poor, mostly girls are.
Others live to 47.
Give us a wave if you're prepared to come on and talk. So somebody else is asking, no, I've lost it, sorry. What motivates the Tavistock? I think that's a very good question. I'm assuming that it's funding and money and that sort of thing. Have you got any idea? Heather wants to tell us. Come on, Heather.
Stephanie, I don't want to jump in here if you want to.
No, we want you to talk as well.
Okay. That's an excellent question to ask. And what was interesting about the court case was that the moral principle underlying it from the Tavistock case, from the position of the Tavistock, was that children are autonomous and independent, and we must respect that. And their identity is of utmost importance. So we must, in a progressive society, allow children to determine their own lives, their own sense of themselves, without having a heavy-handed imposition from the adults. So in answer to your question, I think what is motivating the Tavistock? In many ways, what is motivating the Tavistock is totally ideological. And it was interesting that in the court case, they presented themselves as purely practical based. It was about practice. They got these children with this identity. They never explained where their identity came from, which links up to Stephanie's case, that the identity comes from a range of places. But the Tavistock clinicians don't seem to think beyond the fact that this individual child has this identity, and it's a moral compunction of ours to help alleviate the distress about being in the wrong body. So it's absolutely ideologically based, whilst they present themselves as being that it's a practical solution to these poor children that they have in front of them. Of course, what happened was that our QC then refuted that completely. He came in and said, absolutely not. Our position is practice-based, because what we learn is, for example, that 4 out of 5 children that have gender dysphoria, and thankfully it was called gender dysphoria, not transgenderism. So already you've pulled back from the language of transgenderism, and you have an idea of a child in a developmental stage that has a psychological problem. And he pointed out that if you leave 4 out of 5 of these children, that's 80%.
Yeah.
If you leave children alone, 80% of these children will have just worked through the psychological stages, that the different emotional stages and so on that we all go through in the teenage years, and come out not identifying as being born in the wrong body or identifying with the other sex. So already you're dealing with you're disregarding what you're doing to the 80% of the children. There's no way of distinguishing between those children that are going to leave it behind and the small percentage of children that are going to hang on to it into adulthood. And he also provided evidence such as a contradiction to the Tavistock, which says that puberty blockers provide a pause for the child to think about the issues that they have about their body. But in fact, 98% of children who are put onto puberty blockers inevitably go onto cross-sex hormones. So if you put a 10-year-old child on puberty blockers, the chances are that unless she's one of the fortunate 2% that decides at the age of 15, say, that she wants to resume back, we're practically guaranteeing that 10-year-old will have all the problems associated with cross-sex hormones, including infertility. So their case sounded absolutely bizarre. It was like going down the rabbit hole with Alice in Wonderland. And I thought that the judges got that. But it's based on a very strong moral principle, and I've done lots of reading about what they think and how they justify it. And that moral principle is, it's the child's autonomy, it's the child's identity. We must respect the child's identity. And of course that then bleeds right into the underlying theoretical principles which underpin the Tavistock, undoubtedly underpin the Tavistock.
Thank you for that clarification. There's been some confusion about the 80% and watchful waiting, but it is they're linked. Obviously, if you watchfully wait a child that feels gender dysphoric, then 80% of them will get through it and recover. So it's the same point looked at from a different point of view.
But whether the Tavistock actually ever did carry out watchful waiting, and no doubt will argue that it does carry out watchful waiting, because it certainly doesn't send everybody off to endocrinologists. It doesn't do that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't clarify what this watchful waiting is. You see, the watchful waiting that it carries out, I think, is based on the following: that they think that some children are gender dysphoric, in which case they'll probably watchful wait with those. But for some children, they actually really are transgender, although, you know.
Oh, this is the true trans theory.
True trans theory, that's right. And it would be wonderful to actually be able to tease out some of these things and to have a discussion. But of course, all debate is shut down because debate is transphobic. So we can't, often with this, we're working in a sort of fuzzy blamongy kind of area where we can't get solid answers to solid questions. And the court case, in my view, just played that out completely.
Isn't it crazy that we couldn't have a debate about this until we were in a court of law, it shut down every single time till now. But fortunately, we has got out there, and it has. And I'd like to ask Stephanie and Heather, what you thought of the journalism over the weekend. Have you seen some of the coverage? I thought Janice Turner seemed to absolutely hit the nail on the head. This is about sexual gratification and the chance to be a parent, and you cannot possibly say it's okay to take that away from people. And I thought the judges got that.
Yes, I've only seen Janice Turner's article. I saw some little snippet from Sky News, which was wholly supportive of the medicalisation of children, because
really,
Well, it gave snippets from what their QC had said, not what our QC had said. So the argument that puberty blockers provide give the child a chance to pause puberty and reflect, that was broadcast by Sky News rather than the refutation of that side by RQC Jeremy Hyam. But Jana Turner's article I thought was excellent. She always writes in such a way that I think the general public will get the kernel of the problem, and she does it in a user-friendly way, as it were. No, it was great. Yeah,
she writes for the Times, and someone's saying that there's somebody in the Telegraph today as well, Joe Schutt. I think he was trying to get in touch with Keira over the 2 days.
I haven't.
So I think, and to be fair, you know, the right-wing press has given quite a lot of coverage over the recent months to this. Surprisingly, you'd expect it to be the left-wing press, but we haven't seen very much from them. So yeah, Jessica Evans says that the Telegraph article is very good. So there has been some coverage recently.
Well, this is the anomaly, isn't it? That we're actually, because I don't know about the political position of the people who are participating in this webinar, but so I only speak for myself and from others I've talked to. The anomaly is that we're actually dependent on the right-wing press now to... Yes, which is a strange position, not one we might have expected a few years ago. Yes, actually, yes, so I'm not even seeing the Times particularly as a right-wing newspaper anymore, because it seems to me that the Guardian, on so many issues, not all obviously, but on so many issues, are becoming quite authoritarian as they join in with the identity politics. Just to be clear to other people who've joined us recently about the judgment, we don't know when it'll be because they've got lots of reading to do, but we're expecting around a month. So there is no verdict as yet. We thought there might be, but there isn't. And when it comes out, Keira has said she will come on here and do a webinar with us to talk to people. A good question was asked. What's your best, maybe I'll put this one to Stephanie first and also to Heather. What is your idea of the best possible outcome? What would you really like to see as the outcome to this case? Stephanie, could you give us what you'd like to see on that one?
Well, I'd like to see a judgment made that under 18s cannot make a fully informed consent to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. And my view is that until the teenage brain is fully developed, there are too many risks for teenagers to be making these kind of decisions that will affect them for the rest of their lives. I think this is a unique case that does warrant that decision. That of course that's the decision I would like. I think teenagers are uniquely vulnerable, and one aspect of the case there were, you know, so we may not get that. We may get under 16s, you know, or we may get nothing. We don't know. We just can't speculate.
No, it's just what you'd most like to see. But a few people are saying in the chat, based on the recent research about the young person's brain, there's a lot of evidence now which is being replicated that says that the frontal cortex doesn't really become fully, you know, functional as a decision maker until the age of 25, and some studies I think say 29 in boys.
Yeah. And there was a lot of talk in court about the 10, 11, 12-year-olds. But for me, what has driven this exponential increase over the last decade is the teenagers. It's the adolescents, boys and girls, but mostly girls, who suddenly develop gender dysphoria after puberty. Now, for boys, that is very rare. The model we know is children developing gender dysphoria in early childhood. So this is, but for girls, it's unheard of that a girl will suddenly develop gender dysphoria after puberty. So it's this age group that actually is the biggest concern, and the fact that we don't know anything about this age group. We don't know the etiology of it. We've got Lisa Lippman's study, and really that's it.
Which was a social contagion study.
Well, it found that social contagion may be a factor. So we are working blind with this group, and puberty blockers were intended to be for a completely different cohort of children who developed gender dysphoria in early childhood, persisted in that, usually without any outside influence. You know, they weren't being socially transitioned and affirmed in the past. That's really, you know, begun to happen only over the last decade, really. So these children were persisted and into puberty. Now we're having teenagers develop this with no previous signs of gender dysphoria in early childhood, and they are not the group that have shown, you know, insistence, persistence, consistence over, you know, since early childhood. So they're clearly being given puberty blockers when, you know, very early after deciding they're transgender.
Would you agree that really, because puberty blockers are being used off-label for this purpose, what we actually need is a proper controlled, you know, study on the effects of puberty blockers before they're dished out to anybody off-label?
Yeah, we need proper controlled studies to prove. You know, there are trials on sheep at the moment, and I think people don't realise that this, for use for the age of natural puberty, these drugs have been tested on children before they've been tested on animals. And what sort of surprised me, or it shouldn't really, but in court, the Tavistock again were talking about puberty blockers being used for decades for precocious puberty. Now that's a completely different issue. It's a physical problem that has a, you know, this is provided as a physical solution. Whether you agree with that or not, it's a completely different presentation. But the fact is that those children go off puberty blockers in order to resume puberty at a more developmentally appropriate age, and they will go through their natural puberty. But if you're blocking natural puberty at its natural time, that's a completely different issue. And the trials on sheep are showing us that there is a window of development in puberty for the brain, and I mean, we know that anyway, but and that some brain development, there are changes, negative changes, that are not reversed when puberty blockers are stopped. So, you know, the justification of the use of puberty blockers at the time of natural puberty being their use for precocious puberty just does not hold water. It's not the same thing at all.
Well, pretty much all the things that the other side said didn't hold water. They seem to be very reliant on NHS England says this, the Endocrinological Society says this.
And I believe that's not actually an excuse. I believe,
of course it's not. Policies
but
are
I mean,
wrong.
you know, the clinician, that's not, you know, that's not acceptable as a reason for carrying out treatment. You know, I don't make the rules. You know, I just do it.
Yes.
You know.
At the risk of sounding extreme, this is and apologies if I do, then this is the argument of the concentration camp guard, isn't it? It has been in all the tribunals. I was told to do it, and so I had to. It's not enough. And usually, before they test things on people, with sheep, they test them on pigs, don't they? Because pigs are the closest animals to us. So there's going to be a while before anything comes out of that, I think. Somebody's asked a very, very good question. What happens if we lose? It seems impossible to me, having heard the evidence. But I would, what would you like to say to that, Stephanie, if we lose?
In some ways, the result, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but whatever happens, I think this is the first step. I think it will go to the Supreme Court, whatever happens. But again, whatever happens, one thing is that this judicial review will be considered by Hilary Cass, who is doing the wide-ranging review on the Tavistock JIDs. So that's one thing. All of the evidence from this hearing will feed into that investigation. but also it's a first step. I think the key thing about the JR was that one very brave young woman has taken a first step in examining what's really going on. And whatever the result of this JR, that first step enables the second step and the third, and it will go on. And so to me, that's a win. Whatever the result of the case, we already have a victory just in that first step has been taken. It's
yes, and it was amazing how the evidence spoke for itself when you were not interrupted. Sorry, Heather, I did say I'd come to you to ask about the best outcome as well. Sorry to have had a slight delay on that. Can I come back to you and ask what you think? What is the best thing we could possibly hope from the case?
I think that Stephanie's answered that perfectly, in accord with what she said. Yeah.
Right, thank you. So I'm just quickly checking on the chat. Has anyone got their hand up, Rebecca, that we need to come to?
No one yet. Oh yes, we have one just put up. Menno would like to speak. I'll just turn your voice on. Menno, are you there?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. First of all, I just want to thank you for all the hard work that all you have been doing. I'm a bit late to the party when it comes to becoming aware of this, and it's particularly Stephanie, your work that has really opened my eyes. So thank you so much. I'm coming from the point of view of a very concerned gay man, concerned that we're just sleepwalking into our own erasure as gay men, and now being able to relate to what you must have been feeling for so many years. So thank you very much. My question was about in court, was anything discussed about the role of the parents and how they are involved in the consent?
No, I don't think. Again, that was part of my intervention, but I don't think the court presentation was focused very much on the evidence of the medical treatment, the medical pathway. So those areas outside, and of course it was very much based on the capacity of the child's consent as well. Detransitioners were mentioned, of course. So yes, it was really an exploration of the evidence. So those outside factors didn't really come into that presentation. I'm just checking my notes actually. But no, certainly they didn't. It wasn't a big part. Heather, do you remember?
Yes, parents did come into it. There was a lot of legalese, as it were, between the two different sides.
Yeah.
Parents did come into it, and whether the parents could consent to a treatment against the child's wishes,
that's
or
right. Yeah.
And so on. So the role of the parent was there. I think that's a fascinating thing, what the role of the parent is, but as Stephanie said, it kept coming back to whether the child had the capacity to consent. And it's getting back to the question of where would I wish, what would be my hopes for this? One of the things that I think we should begin to talk about is the role of the parent. In some sense, the parent gets lost out of this discussion. You know, the manifest areas in which the parents are involved, and you know, whether they're upset, whether they daren't support their child, whether they dare speak out, and so on. So this is a very serious issue, and I think maybe some of us have talked about now going in that direction of doing research into parents and ourselves making recommendations. By recommendations, I mean in the sense that we have done in terms of recommending that children are not medicalized, or recommending that outside organizations trained by Stonewall or Gendered Intelligence are not allowed to teach children and teachers about gender identity theory. So we shall go on. This is the beginning of a road that we're
We shall
all going down, I think.
Yeah, I think we have to remember that we're apparently leading the world in this. You know, that's what we were told in New York when we went there to help launch the Women's Declaration. We thought that the Swedish people would tell us how to do it, and they said, no, you in the UK are leading the world. So whatever happens, we're going to carry on. You know, there's a long road ahead of us. We're not going to run out of campaigning to do in the near future. And it's very, very unfortunate. Thank you, Leanne, for pointing that out, that a lot of parents would rather a trans child than a gay child. So homophobia is definitely something, particularly lesbophobia, something we all have to get out there and fight.
But in relation to that point that was just previously made, I also think that the LGBTQ movement is going to shoot itself in the foot, in that if at some point it has begun to be understood as quite unreasonable in its demands, or people actually work out what is truly being said, the people who are going to be hurt are actually LGB people, because there will be a backlash. And I don't know whether the other person was referring to that, but yes, one can feel that that might be beginning to happen. And of course, it's not what any of us who are critical of trans ideology want. So I think it is important to bring that into the debate. So thanks for that. Yeah.
Any more people waiting to speak, Rebecca?
Yes, we have a few actually. Should we go to Anne Sinnott? I'm going to
yes, Anne, congratulations on your nomination for the Emma Humphreys Memorial Prize. We're very pleased to see that. Please ask your question if we can get you fixed up.
And I think you need to unmute. Can you unmute your microphone?
Who's responsible for that?
Are you there, Anne?
I am. Can you not hear me?
Yeah, we can now. Yes, I was just saying congratulations on your nomination for the Emma Humphreys Memorial Prize.
Yes, I was saying thank you for that. Thank you for that. And Heather's responsible for that.
Oh,
Heather nominated me.
Well done, Heather.
Yes, thanks. It came at a very busy time, so it was very overwhelming when I realised I'd been shortlisted, because I never thought that I would be. But anyway, so going back, Stephanie, thanks for being here, and also Heather. You're absolutely right about this being simply a first step. And I think if it is the only step, and if, say, the worst case scenario, the case went against us, it still shone a huge glaring light on the issue, and there will be parents out there as a result questioning. But I don't think it is just one step and nothing more. You know, so we'll await that. But I wanted to know, so, you know, in the live tweets, someone said that the defence had referred to the NHS review and suggested that a result couldn't be given until that outcome was known. So can you confirm that? And was it spoken about as a possibility with Jeremy, for instance?
That's wrong. That's wrong. That was something put forward by the Tavistock barrister, and Dr. Hilary Cass has said that the result of the JR would be feeding into her investigation. The other case that Keira Bell was bringing, which was the case on affirmation, was halted because those issues will be covered in Hilary Cass's review. But this one, no, the result will come out and that will feed into Hilary Cass's investigation.
That's good, that's great. Thanks.
Any more? Because we need to move on shortly to talk about Heather's book.
We have a couple waiting. Should we ask them? Would it be possible to go quickly, maybe? We have Fiona, who I know has been waiting for a little while. Fiona, I'm going to go to you now.
Go, Fiona.
Fiona, are you there? Oh, she's disappeared. Maybe I did something.
Oh, maybe she's gone.
Here we go. I'll try again. Fiona, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me now? Right. Thank you. Yes. Between the court's papers and the Cass review, is there going to be any exploration, do you think, or will the judges consider the diagnostic criteria for the trans child? You know, that whole question of, is there, you know, from Heather's previous work, is there even such a thing? Because what troubles me, like you, I guess, is when people talk about it as if it's definitely a thing. Did you see any signs that the judges were questioning that?
I think the judges are looking at the information. They're looking very carefully at the rationale for the treatment and the effects of the treatment that we don't know. But I think that when we applied to intervene, I had to write a full submission. The court asked for a full submission and full evidence bundle, and by a deadline. And the court gave Transgender Trend permission to intervene on the basis that that our information added to the case. In other words, it brought in something new that wasn't already there, and it was potentially relevant. So those look at the criteria that we were granted permission to intervene. Now, the judge also refused permission to Stonewall and to Mermaids, and on exactly the same criteria. So the judge looked through the evidence and the submissions, witness statements from Stonewall and Mermaids, and judged them to be not relevant to the case or repeating evidence that had already been presented by the Tavistock. So I think that the evidence that they presented was evidence such as bullying, hate crime, stigma, those sorts of issues, which the judge declared not relevant to this case. So they were bringing in outside factors, but they brought in factors that in the judgment of the judges was not relevant. It didn't impact on the issue, which was, can under 18s give informed consent to this treatment? So that gives me, from that, we can see that the judges have read through the submissions very, very carefully. And to me, that shows that they have good powers of analysis of the material that's presented to them. And that gives me hope, you know, that they have an understanding of the wider issues and the wider context. Does that answer your question? I think I might have gone a bit Heather.
I think I do want to move on quite soon. I think we've got one person waiting. But I think what I'd like to do now is to transfer to Heather. If we have actually got the ability today to go on past 4:30 if we need to. I realise not all our panellists might be able to go on past 4:30, but we can have a discussion after 4:30 if necessary. So hang on to those questions if you would like them answered. I'd just like to move now to Heather, who has got her book out called Transgender Body Politics, which I've read. I recommend it highly. It's very readable, very short chapters. It's full of detail, but it does make the points very, very clearly. So I recommend you read that. The title is Transgender Body Politics. So she's obviously concentrating on the political issue. This didn't come out of nowhere. This is a men's rights activist movement. It came out of the backlash against women's rights. And Heather gives quite a lot of wonderful examples and explanation as to how that happened. And a lot of people are foxed by this. I often get asked, you know, where did the transgender movement come from? It came out of getting back at women, I think, getting back for fighting for our rights and for making a lot of progress on our rights. So I do recommend that. Heather has published many books. She's, I think this is the first one she's written all by herself on the transgender issue. Other books she's written or she's edited and brought other people in to do specialist chapters on. So Heather, what led you to write this book? Please tell us how you got started.
Right. I am going to answer that, and I think I'm going to answer it best by replying to the last person, who I think was called Fiona, who said, sure, was there a way in which, whether there is such a thing as transgenderism, was that discussed in the court case? And the answer to that is no, because the court case, as Stephanie pointed out, was focused on a very tiny thing, whether children can consent and the harms of taking the drugs. So this, and it was very frustrating for me to have it narrowed down in that way, because I wanted to say the reason why we're talking about whether children consent, whether children should be taking these harmful drugs, is because of the larger issue of the transgender movement, of which what happens in the Tavistock is a consequence. So what I did in the book was I tried to write the story of how putting men who identify as women into women's jails, even if those men have been convicted of rape, has become reasonable, seemed to be reasonable. How it has become reasonable to imagine that we can put a man who identifies as a woman into a soccer match, into a woman's rugby match. How it has become reasonable to change the language so that women can be called cervix havers, and how this gets connected up with what we do with children. So the aim of the book was to join the dots with in all of these different instances, because I think we get into thinking we can be quite persuasive with people in arguing that children shouldn't be medicalized. But the very same people will think, well, we shouldn't do that, but it would be authoritarian and illiberal to stop men from being able to self-identify as women if they so choose. So I noticed that people could hold a lot of different sets of ideas which were contradictory, in fact, in their minds. And so the book is an attempt to explain that. Thankfully, Janice has read it, and it seems to have worked for her. I await other people to read it, and so other people will be the judge of whether I've succeeded in doing that. But that was my purpose. And underlying that, I've had an absolute frustration ever since I began to be involved in this from about 2016, was the way that I have been seen, or I've been characterized as a bigot, a transphobe, a hater, and all of those things which I have no identification with whatsoever as a person. And I hope my life previous to this will be indicate that. That it was almost the reverse. The authoritarianism is coming from the trans activist movement. Exactly. And the sort of shock of that, and the way that almost now it's obviously become so popular to see it like that. I know that the people in the pub down the road probably have never even, some of them have never even heard of any of this.
Oh, they have.
But many have now. And we've got to the stage where it was going to be possible that a law was going to change in this country, which said that men could identify as women. They could sign a piece of paper to say so, and for all intents and purposes, they could declare their birth certificates would change, that they had been born female. Now, behind all of this, what led up to that was a whole lot of theoretical stuff, campaigning, slight shifts in the law over the years. So what seems to us that has just almost appeared from nowhere has taken a long time and a lot of strategic activism from trans ideological movement. I wasn't going to say trans rights, because I believe that trans rights are fully satisfied. I don't want to take the rights away from any human being. So this slogan, trans rights are human rights, itself is just another way of ideologically mobilizing the ordinary person, as if to suggest that what somebody like myself and Transgender Trend, or any organization that's dedicated to critiquing the whole panoply of issues here, ever want to take the human rights away of anyone. In fact, we're concerned about human rights. So I'm very concerned about human rights. I think the trans activist movement is eroding them. And I think it's all connected up. What happens to children? What happens in women's prisons? What happens to our language? It's all connected. So that's the book. I hope I've explained it fully in the book.
Yes, That's great, thank you. Yes, very encouraging to see people in the chat making all the links with other forms of objectification. You know, it's exactly the same in prostitution where, you know, she's a girl and the moment she turns 18, you can exploit her and pay her and so on.
Absolutely.
And they porn, prostitution, strip clubs.
Yeah.
Just let me throw in the excellent news that Spearmint Rhino in Sheffield has not renewed its application. So Spearmint Rhino in Sheffield has closed down thanks to all the activists up there. Nice piece of news. And these issues are all linked, which is why it's so important not just to take the trans issue in isolation, because otherwise sooner or later people will realise the truth behind the trans issue, but the misogyny won't go away, it will just come out in another area. So we have to keep making those links. Well done for pointing them out in the chat. Good to see that.
Could I come back to who did that, who said that? Because she was absolutely right. And I just want to make the link now that what has actually happened is the minute you lose sex as a category, I know we've heard this before, but it's important to reiterate it. The minute we lose the idea of biological sex and substitute it with gender identity, I mean, it's such a simple thing to have done, which has had mammoth monumental consequences. This affects women in every area, you know, in relation to pornography or prostitution or surrogacy. You focus on identity and the right to your own personal identity, and it shifts attention away from the actual politics, the sex-based politics that are going on in all of these different areas. So it seemed to me, I remember when I first started to concentrate on trans, people would say to me, don't do that, because there are these other major issues that you're giving attention, you know, and we need you to keep giving attention to pornography, for example, or prostitution, and redefine them away from this issue of alleged empowerment and women's choice, and how people on our side, as it were, were so authoritarian because what we were wanting to do is take women's agency away from them. And so I was exploring that at the time. The reason why I ended up concentrating on transgenderism, they are absolutely linked. The reason why I started to concentrate on it and feel sad in a way that I, for the moment, abandoned these other issues is because I worked out that transgenderism is, at this moment in time, the main ideology which is mobilizing all of it. If we let this through without providing a break to it, all of those other things will follow without question. So the minute we accept that identity is individualized, freedom is about what I decide for myself, and nobody's got a right to tell me about anything else, and I shall do as I please, then, you know, liberalism itself, our liberal democracy, is actually under threat. It's huge what's going on. Huge, absolutely huge. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry?
I would say that gender identity, it erases sex. I would suggest that it also erases age. And this is how this has happened to children, because we have gender identity that you are born with. And anybody expressing a gender identity, 4 years old, 17 years old, 43 years old, it's the gender identity that is treated as the same thing, no matter what your age or level of development is. It doesn't matter. So a 4-year-old boy who likes wearing princess costumes is treated in exactly the same way as a 15-year-old autistic girl who's been bullied, as if they're exactly the same and same level of development.
Would either of you like to comment on the paedophile agenda?
Could I would absolutely like to. Stephanie, I'm so pleased that you said that. It's really important to bring this in, and this is where, which I also put in the book, we have to return to queer theory, and people, you know, we have to get our heads around it. It's no good avoiding that and thinking, oh, that's just theoretical, because we want to, you know, deal with these practical things. Because the significance of queer theory is that what it does is, it started out as quite a good thing, I think. I've actually spoken about this on another YouTube that Graham Linehan has just recorded.
Oh, yeah.
But if it never comes out, please invite me back, and I'll do this.
Queer theory next time.
Queer theory next time. So what it says is that that the norms, the hetero norms, have been very restricted for all of us, and I think we can go along with that. So you could use that argument to argue that women have been policed by hetero norms too. What it is to be a woman, to be a wife, to be a mother, and those are very orthodox things that we rejected, that second wave feminism fought against. So it seemed at an initial start of queer theory that it was going to encompass all social structures involved in heteronorms. But what it has done is it's taken up a particular political position, which is anything which is outside of the norm must be good on the sheer fact that it has been policed. So homosexuality was policed, so let us stop policing it. Adult child sex, which is what they talk, they don't call it paedophilia. Adult child sex has been policed, and that, according to queer theory, is a wrong done to the child, because what you're doing is you're policing the child's sexuality. You're policing the child's ability to consent or to desire an adult. So it's been used as in a specific way that we need to absolutely closely analyze. And once you take away biological sex, the developmental stages of childhood, the vulnerability of the child's body before it's gone through puberty, when it's has no sexual desires, and so on. Once you've erased that from view, as it were, you then get back to this individual identity. It's my rights, it's the child's rights. In fact, and I know the Tavistock are not saying this, so if anybody from the Tavistock is listening in, I'm not accusing the Tavistock of supporting child sexual abuse at all. I'm pointing out that some of the language that the clinicians use to talk about the child's autonomy, the child's independence, the child's rights, is some of the language that paedophiles talk about. They use the exact language to talk about the child's rights to have sex before the age of 16. So in that language, you're freeing the child. You're in a progressive society where we're not policing children's sexuality all the time. So somewhere along the line, if we analyze it, these concepts mesh, they engage, and we have to be cognizant of this. Otherwise, we're in real danger. As we know, probably most people in this webinar will realize that actually what is going along with the trans rights movement is children's rights to have sex, children's rights to be incited to a sexuality. So, you know, the little, I've forgotten the name of them now, but when people in drag go into story time, this is allegedly now progressive, and we find that parents are going along with it. I mean, it's beyond belief, when it's quite clearly highly sexualized. So I'm slightly losing myself now, but Stephanie's made it.
I think you're taking this onto some very good territory. I'd just like to say on the drag queen, there's people here who stood outside a cinema in North London picketing a drag queen story time, and we got very little joy from parents. But the person to look for drag queen story time is Kitty Demure, who is a drag queen who says, from her position of knowing all about drag queens, all the reasons why you should not put children anywhere near one. So Kitty Demure is the drag queen to go for. The chats, people are very busy in the chat. asking, amongst other things, about the influence of Martin Rothblatt, and also about transhumanism, just to, and some of the sort of billionaires behind the transgender movement. Just to say that we did have Kathleen Richardson on our very first webinar talking about sex robots and the links to the trans movement. And the wonderful Jennifer Bielek has promised to come on when she's got herself all settled in Florida. So we'll hope to bring you Jennifer Bielek before Christmas with a bit of luck. Heather, would you like to comment on any of those aspects, the billionaires, the Rothblatts, the transhumanists?
Yeah. Just to say that I have written about them in the book. Most definitely, the trans movement is being funded, is absolutely being funded. It's very clear about that, and I write about that in the book. So I think two things are going on. You have a sort of the ideology, the trans ideology, being facilitated from above, as it were, through well-funded organizations and people within those organizations. And it's a grassroots movement which is coming from below, as it were, so which has been so persuasive that even parents will sit through, as I pointed out earlier, and which Janice has just pointed out. There isn't a groundswell of parents who are objecting to this, because everybody has been fooled by this idea that all of this is progressive. So when you get from the ground root, oh, it's progressive, and if we see something that doesn't look right, it must be me that's the problem because everybody else is going along with it. You know, people policing themselves in relation.
Groupthink. Yes.
Groupthink. Absolutely groupthink about this. So this collective groupthink is going on, which is being fed lots and lots of money, and you know, you can include big pharma and all of that.
Yeah,
you have to make all of these links. It's very important, because unless we make the links, we won't be able to. We need an army, a really strong army. That's what I think, of people who, I think I said this to you, Janice, I'm not quite sure whether it was on the previous webinar I was on, but I will repeat it again because I think it's worth it. We need an army of people to stand solid with each other, to learn about it as much as we can and all the different aspects of it. And it's really important that we stand firm with this. And look what we've done in the past 3 years.
I know, it's incredible, isn't it, how much we've managed to achieve, given that we're just a disparate group of women, and a lot of us have been kicked out of our jobs or felt we wanted to leave. Yes. The people that you think would be busy looking after the children and making the dinner are actually changing the world.
I know. Can I just point out that when I first was on a panel with Stephanie, somebody told me, don't go on a panel with Stephanie Davies-Arai, because her work isn't scientifically based, unlike, of course, Stonewall and mermaids and gendered intelligence. And I'm sure people were told, don't go on a panel with Heather Brunskill-Evans because she says this is a men's rights movement. Or so we've withstood that, not just Stephanie and I, but many other women have withstood this, and we've got to continue to withstand being policed within our own movement too, about who we should talk to and who we shouldn't talk to. I think we should let all of that go. My own view is, let all of that go. We can have those disputes afterwards. The main thing is that this movement the trans rights movement will overtake women's rights and children's rights, boys and girls' rights, actually boys too, unless we stand firm here.
Yes, and we're doing what we can to protect them.
And we do what we can, and look how far we've come in 3 years. It's been it's amazing. Hence,
it is amazing, Some very good points in the chat, if I can just say about the being suspicious of grassroots movements. It's very easy to get at grassroots movements. And the one I'd like to get at, just as an example, is the English Collective of Prostitutes. We have written to them, we've challenged them publicly at Amnesty Conference to say, be open about where your money comes from. If you're an army of women in prostitution spending £10 a year to support you to put their views forward, fantastic. Let us have a bit of openness. Let's have one of these organisations that investigates to go in and look and tell us if it's all okay. And we've said, we're happy to do that. We're happy to be open about our finance. We haven't even had a response. They don't even dignify us, because clearly entitled to surmise that they're funded by the sex trade. Where do you go in prostitution when people don't want to fuck you anymore? Pardon my French. Unfortunately, you buy into the business and you try and persuade other women to go in there as well. So you're absolutely right. And the so-called grass movements in the trans movement are no different at all. So we have to be very, very suspicious about those. We've got somebody saying, Kelly's question, Kelly Zimba says, what I don't understand is how intelligent people can't see all these links. We can see it, why can't other people? Would you like to address that one, Heather?
I can. I'm aware that I've been talking quite a long time.
I think it's okay. I'm afraid we made you wait because there was a lot of interest in the court case. Court cases are more exciting, but books are probably in the long term more influential. So carry on, please. Just to say, we're happy to go after 4:30. If you've all got appointments at 4:30, then give us a wave and cheerio. And panelists, I know we didn't discuss this, but there's such a lot of interest in this. So we're able to go on a bit longer if you are. If you have to go, let us know.
Janice, I could talk about this for the next 6 hours.
No, not that long, not that long. A few minutes would be good.
Well, I think again that's a complex thing. Somebody wrote an article the other day, I've forgotten who it is now, who said that what actually happened in Nazi Germany, how the Nazism as an ideology was so powerful. It wasn't because initially people were afraid that they were going to be dragged off and murdered or taken off to a gulag somewhere. It was because all that happened was, if you didn't go along with the ideology, you just wouldn't get promoted in your job, or you would lose your job. So it starts small scale. And I think what's happened is all sorts of small scale things are going on at the moment. Like people possibly critique it, but they think I daren't critique it because I know that that person over there, when she critiqued it, all those terrible things happened to her. So, and if the whole world is supporting that terrible thing to happen to her, maybe I'm not getting it right, so I won't say so much. So this is how people can become quite blinkered and quite, get tunnel vision about it, or tunnel ethics about it, or no ethics, which is just let me get on with my life. That's a fight that's going on over there. It's got nothing to do with me. I'll keep my head down. Now, the people who are intelligent, who are aware of it, how do you think about that? It's a conundrum. I don't know how to think about that, other than I think sexual violence against women has become so accepted and normalized now that nobody cares about it in particular. So when J.K. Rowling talked about the ways in which women might be suspicious of men in their personal spaces, she wasn't making an accusation against any particular trans person. She was making an argument about the social conditions on which women live, that men, not all men, but men, the empirical evidence there is that men predate upon women, and women have ended up being frightened of sharing their spaces with men because we can't judge who's going to predate and who isn't, and so on. Nobody cared about that. That was just completely ignored. And who we looked at, who our sympathy had to be trained upon, was the tiniest minority of people who identify as trans. I mean, it's less than 1%. We're over 50% of the population. It's less than 1%. And within that, it's even less than that because trans men, women who identify as men, are not the problem in that way. So for the tiniest percentage of the population, we're very concerned about their feelings. And the only way that I can answer that is a numbness to the violence that women experience, the ways in which people would have to reflect, and a lot of men would actually have to reflect upon the culture in which they participate, who wouldn't dream of assaulting a woman, but perhaps look at pornography and see it as their right to do so, and so forth. And so sorry, I've slightly lost my thread there.
About intelligent people.
Yes, intelligent people. And
it's not about intelligence, is it?
It's not about intelligence. And this idea, which I keep wanting to bang on about, but it's so important, this idea that it's progressive to accept that trans men who identify with women actually are women. That has got such hold.
Yep.
We will be pulled along by this idea of progressivism, and it doesn't matter how much evidence, how many, you know, it's always an exceptional case. They say, oh, Karen White was just an exceptional case. Somebody who's done that act, a trans woman who's done that, that's an exceptional. They're all exceptional cases.
That's right. It's not about being intelligent, it's about being brave and stroppy and having the courage to go against the trend. And whereas that is normally socialized out of women, but fortunately many of us have hung on to it.
I think there are other tactics that have been used as well, and one of them is the idea that gender now is so complicated that most people don't understand it. And people said, oh, I don't really understand what's going on there, you know, gender. So they've sort of mystified the area, and they've done that for teachers and clinicians as well, that, you know, mental health professionals will send children to the Tavistock because, oh, this is a specialist area and only the gender experts understand it. So they've done that, and I think they've really pulled the wool over the eyes of a lot of people. They've done that. They've sold it to children as well. So if you're really clever can you understand gender, but because we don't understand it, we've just got to sort of accept all of these messages. And that you know, it amazes me that they have managed to sell to parents the idea and the message that your child's body is wrong, and you know, that your child has actually been born into the wrong body, and they have sell that idea to parents. So I think it's the way that they have mystified this area and presented it as so complicated. I think that's the way they've done that. But the other way, and certainly in schools, is use of those magic words, diversity and inclusion. And in fact, equality law is based on sometimes inclusion and sometimes exclusion. They are equal. That, you know, those two, you know, and clearly there are areas for women where exclusion of men is a way to achieve equality, because you know, male-free public toilets and changing rooms enable women to participate in public life, and the mixed-sex toilets and changing rooms will keep some women at home. I mean, it will actually, you know, clearly have that effect. But you know, words are exclusive. The word woman is exclusive of men. Language is exclusive, and that's not bad and mean and nasty. That's simply a fact. It means, you know, words define things. It's the, you know, we use the words table and chair so that we all understand the distinction between those two objects, and to sort of to bring children up to believe that some words are offensive, and particularly words like girl. May have you be careful on how you use any of those words around to do with women, because they may offend people.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
Could I
Somebody's asked if Heather and possibly also Stephanie would like to comment on the stands taken by people like the NSPCC and Women's Aid and so on these issues.
Can I say, yeah, I think that the medicalisation of children is an act of child abuse, not just in terms of its medicalisation, but in terms of the trans activist movement is abusing children, because it's the grown-up, the adults who identify as trans, who have made a case for medicalising children. So they have used children to support their own argument that they themselves were born trans. So if you're born trans, what you've become involved in isn't psychological, it's not sociological, it's not political, it's innocent, because you were born that way and you can't help it. And so then you use childhood as a way of of justifying that. So we were born that way, and if you medicalize the child, then they say, often glamour, people who are making a lot of money, trans women who are making a lot of money by being models and so on, that they're actually victims. Because, you know, if this had been around, these possibilities been around when they were a child, they would have welcomed medical transition. So from the mouths of these people comes the idea that it's only humane to medically transition children. And so but the point is that anybody who is taking cross-sex hormones, which every adult who identifies with trans who is taking hormones knows that behind the glamour there are a lot of unsavory things attached to the cross-sex hormones in relation to their bodies, the effects on the body, permanent medical patient for life. So to argue that the children should go through that at an early stage actually beggars belief to me. It really does beg a belief. So that the NSPCC go along with it demonstrates what I really want to come on to as well. It's not just the NSP, all organizations have been captured, institutionally captured by this ideology, largely by Stonewall, but all the other groups that we know about. And I would love to bring mermaids back into this, and gendered intelligence. And I think that they're bamboozled by it. They only hear one point of view. And if you're told that you only must listen to that point of view because any other point of view is just hateful and transphobic, somehow the trans movement has been so successful in creating that cultural attitude that we now have organizations like the NSPCC, which don't enter into conversations with us, analyze what we do say and what we don't say, but reject, sort of cancel us, whether it's on platforms or not, just cancel us completely. So what we're struggling against is this empire which has been created. And we're basically saying, which is the conclusion to my book, the emperor doesn't actually have any clothes on.
Yeah.
And so we're acting almost like the small child saying, but the emperor doesn't have any clothes on.
Yes.
Sooner or later, we'll say it enough that people may be able to themselves think, hang on, does the emperor actually have any clothes? And dare we think that this emperor has no clothes on?
Which is the truth. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of people are saying on the chat that they've lost friends. Yes, I've lost friends too. We all have. But sometimes you have to look at them and say, actually, how much of friends were they if you can't discuss a big issue like this with them? You know, maybe they've slipped into being old friends or acquaintances. It's very sad, but it's very important. As you know, as Heather says, there's no army waiting to fight this battle. We are the army waiting to fight this battle. And for considering the ragtag army that we are, we're doing very, very well. And you mustn't pass over the agony also of parents who are losing their children, losing their children's well-being to this horrendous cult.
Can I just come in on that? That's about the NSPCC and the other organisations. One of the things that the Tavistock barrister said at the hearing that really struck me was she described the kids who are being referred to the Tavistock as a completely different class of people. And that, to me, I think that's part of the sort of mystification of this area. We don't understand. They are somehow completely different. But to talk about children in that way, I would think is a red flag warning, because clearly they're not. I mean, they are a bunch of ordinary adolescents. In fact, they are a bunch of particularly vulnerable adolescents. They're lesbians or gay.
Yeah. Lesbian erasure is very, very big in all this.
You know, they're kids from care homes. They're adolescents with mental health issues who've been bullied or feel different or left out, or adolescents who've suffered child sexual abuse, child rape. previous trauma, chaotic family backgrounds. They are, in fact, our most vulnerable teenagers. They are not, you know, they're a completely different class of people in that sense. You know, I think it's a really problematic way of describing a group of children. But that idea, as Heather said, that every organisation and institution has been captured by this. And it's just particularly concerning that children's charities have, because that idea that these are somehow sort of magical rainbow children who are completely different to the rest of us, and normal rules do not apply. So normal rules of child development, for example, do not apply to these children. They're outside that. And normal rules of safeguarding don't apply to these children. They're outside that. You know, every area we look at that we use to protect children is erased by this idea. And of course, the idea of gender identity, which is a sort of unverifiable subjective feeling, as the distinction between girls and boys erases sexual boundaries. It's completely, you cannot distinguish between males and females without being seen as a bigot or transphobic. And that in itself is something that you would expect any organisation working with children, any school, any children's charity, to immediately see a red flag there. You've got organisations going into schools and saying that they must have mixed sex toilets, mixed sex changing rooms, mixed sex residential accommodation. Immediately, you for me, that's just a red flag, and it just shows how far this ideology has managed to pull the wool over the eyes of everyone who really should know better, and particularly those in a position where their job is safeguarding children and young people.
Yes, it's incredible, isn't it? It really is. More people, I think, with their hands up. Rebecca, would you like to? Did I see Dr. Cleves in there? In the Q&A? Can we have anyone that's got their hand up, please, Rebecca?
Okay, Bridget, you've had your hand up for a little while. Would you still like to speak? I'm going to click allow to talk. Are you there, Bridget?
I think it's Brigitta.
Is it Brigitta? Sorry,
it might be.
Apologies.
She might not hear herself as Bridget. If not, we'll maybe come back to her.
Let's give
her.
No,
it's okay.
Hi.
Can you hear me? It's Bridget.
Yes.
Hi. Now, it doesn't mention very often. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we can hear you fine, Bridget.
But the whole transgender ideology is completely evidence-free.
Yes.
And I think it was Stephanie has just this minute ago said that gender identity is very subjective. Well, there is a fairly new field of study in the neurosciences. And that is important because they are evidence-based. That's an evidence-based study. And I know of a field called cognitive neuroscience.
Well, I probably won't go. I won't go to sleep.
Hello?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Else came in there.
Yeah. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Now, the identity formation process is a very complex cognitive process. It is largely unconscious. We're not even aware that we're doing it. We are using internal and external information to kind of cobble together our identity. And you can see here why, as far as internal information is concerned, if you are gay or lesbian feelings, or you are autistic, or you have had abuse and you feel badly about yourself, you can see why this process is going to be hampered. And because you also need external reference points. So your identity does have to correlate with the material reality. You can see why transgender ideology goes in there and allows a misalignment. I call it a misalignment. I'm not a neuroscientist. This is just how I see it. They kind of validate a misalignment, and just to help it along, you have compelled speech and compelled affirmation, because this is crucial. This is a very crucial external data that we need for our identity. The reason why I don't go around thinking of myself a Jedi Knight is because I can't get anyone to agree with me. So you can see here that we desperately need some input that introduces the notion of evidence. You can't just go around saying, well, you know, we're discussing this amorphous hypothetical identity, but there is actually enough evidence in neuroscience to stop us to start talking about identity as something that is actually it has an evidence basis. So if there's anybody at all cognizant with neuroscience and happens to know somebody who is a cognitive neuroscientist, please let me know, because I will want to lobby them.
I think let's definitely take that one away to Transgender Trend. And I think what we're looking at here, and evidence is great, but as we said earlier, this is a cult. This is not about intelligent people working out. You have to be as well as intelligent. You have to be brave, and you have to be stroppy, and you have to be able to speak out against the minority, the majority, and that's what we're all doing. And a lot of people aren't, unfortunately, strong enough to do that. Could we bring in somebody else? I think we've got Dr. Anna Cleves there waiting to come in. This is Dr. Anna Cleves, who got the gendered intelligence course taken down from the Future Learn website, by the way, if you don't know her.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about ordinary people, it's no good being gentle with them. You have to talk about mutilation. You have to talk about brainwashing. You have to use very, very strong language for those that are unconvinced, because 2 years ago, my daughter told me she'd rather her little 3-year-old boy was a girl than in the grave. And she was appalled at my language, but she's come round. It's taken, a year and a half, but eventually she came to me and said, I've just been looking up Mumsnet and they're horrified. Oh yeah, good. You're there.
Well, she's on Mumsnet, she's all right.
But it takes that. It takes that. You need to actually, say things to women, for example, you know what? If this lot takes off, all we'll be suitable for will be prostitution, surrogacy and strip clubs. That's all women will be doing, because they will take everything from us. Yeah. And I've got nothing to lose. Unlike Heather, she lost various positions. I'm retired. So get us all old ladies, us all ladies, get out there and convince them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we've got someone called Maria waiting to speak as well. Can we have you in, please, Maria, with your question or comment?
No, it's just, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Maria, we can hear you.
Yeah, it's just, I was wondering about Mrs. A, who was part of the case. Was she vocal? Was she a witness there? What was her case about?
I don't know, Heather or Stephanie, do you know Mrs. A?
Yes, thank you for bringing up Mrs. A. She's really, really important in this case. She didn't go to the hearing, but she tends to be forgotten often. And she's a very brave parent to do it. Her daughter is on the waiting list of the Tavistock, and she doesn't want the same treatment and the same lack of investigation as Keira experienced for her own daughter. So she has to remain anonymous, of course, for the protection of her daughter, but she was a really, really important part of this case. Does that...
she made submissions, I suppose, to the court. Yeah.
Yes, yes. The court has seen her witness statement. Oh, and on the issue of neuroscience, we had one of our witness statements was from Professor Sophie Scott, who talked about the development of the teenage brain and, you know, neurobiological development, and so we had very sort of top class evidence in that area as well.
I think we have to remember that Stephanie in Transgender Trend were shortlisted for the John Maddox Prize for Science and Innovation in Science. So I think, well, when you want to find out about the science, Transgender Trend website is definitely the place to look for. When you have read Heather's book, Transgender Body Politics, don't miss that out.
Yes, can I say
those two, you'll be very well informed.
Can I say I've read the introduction and one chapter, the one that most relevant to my work of Heather's book, and it's excellent. You know, absolutely. Heather really knows how to put a sentence together.
I would say so, yes.
Yeah, just fantastic, fantastic reading, and the way that Heather puts things makes them so clear. And you know, people who I think who perhaps haven't got it will get it through reading Heather's book.
Yeah, someone's just put a little note on. Thank you, Alan. Say that she's Sophie Scott CBE now. She must have been in the new honours list that's came out. So congratulations to Sophie Scott on that. That's really, really good news. Some people are saying they're having trouble getting hold of the book, Heather. It's published by Spinifex, which is an Australian feminist publisher. The easiest way might be to go onto the Spinifex website and order it. I tried to get hold of it via my normal book channel and had a problem. So feel free, go on Spinifex publisher, and they will get it to you. It's not cheap. I hope you've been saving up, but it's worth every penny.
It's cheap. It's cheap.
It's cheaper than the last one.
No, it's cheap. I think you can get it in the UK now for between £6 and £10. So,
really?
Yes. If you get it from Spinifex, do try that, but it will take a long time to get from Australia. I hope people are telling me lots of people have got a copy, and people have got copies from Amazon. Whether you want to use Amazon or not is a different
There's a few
thing.
good alternatives.
Sorry?
There's a few good alternatives. I like to use News from Nowhere in Liverpool, feminist cooperative.
Yes. So, but people are beginning to tell me that they're unable to get the book now, and I'm hoping that is because there has been such a demand for it.
Of course.
That they're running out of them, and so we're waiting for the next lot to be printed. But yeah. So I can't really explain why you're having difficulty, other than that they're out in this country, and well,
we will persevere, and we will get hold of them, and we will read them, and we will pass them on to other people and lend them to people.
Yes, but they are cheap. They are very cheap in comparison to the last books. Yeah.
Yes, we have to save up for that one. Yes.
Yeah.
Just a question I've got for you, Heather. You know, you had such trouble getting the last book out because the trans activists tried to, close down intimidate the publishers and things like that. Did you have any problems like that this time?
It's even more serious, Janice. It wasn't the trans activists that attempted to stop it from being published. It was the Tavistock that attempted.
Tell us more.
Yeah, well, read the book. It's in the book. The story is in the book.
Right.
They made all kinds of reasons why they should look at the book and vet the book so that they could.
Because you're a TERF, yeah.
Whether whether it was something that should be published. And of course, they gave spurious reasons for that, just as they gave spurious reasons in the court case for why we shouldn't have this bit of knowledge or why we shouldn't have that bit of knowledge. It was usually around patient confidentiality or something. So the issue with it was, that was shocking. We got letters from lawyers and so on trying to encourage us, is a polite way of saying it, to hand over the book pre-publication. The difficulty with that was that the publishers got very frightened. that they would be sued for publishing it. So it was supposed to come out weeks and weeks, you know, a few months actually before it came out, because we had to persuade the publishers that, and we had to get pro bono lawyers in to comb every word, etc., etc. So that's a long story in itself, a shocking story in and of itself, that we are getting to a society in which books cannot be, not only cannot be sold, but cannot be published, cannot be written. Extremely dangerous,
isn't it? Censorship.
Absolutely. So let me get to Spinifex. Spinifex have been fantastic. And I had a very different experience with Spinifex, including that they worked with me in relation to this book. So that being somebody who is trained to try to say things as objectively as I can, thank you. Keep getting cups of tea brought to me.
Oh, lucky old you.
Spinifex encouraged me to put some personal detail in the book to make it more alive. So I wrote the book, and then they said, this is good, but why don't you put into it that at that particular time when that incident happened, you were there, and those trans activists stood on desks to stop you from, you know, invaded the lecture theatre or whatever.
Yeah, in Bristol.
I thought, okay. And I started to put sort of examples from my own experience in the book. And then once I'd started to do that, then the whole thing of writing the book became much more cathartic. So I thought, right, that's it. I'm going for it. I'm really going for it now. I'm not trying to sort of stand slightly back and present a case. I'm saying that this case is absolutely, you know, what I'm talking about is so real. Yeah. It is about flesh and blood human beings, both in terms of their sex, those who try to speak about it, those who try to write about it, those who try to teach about it. There really is a suppression of any other way of viewing trans in our culture. And I did that more effectively, I hope, by using examples from my own life to demonstrate that.
Yes. Which is exactly what Kimberly Crenshaw did when she wrote her stuff. I mean, they've been talking about the triple oppression of Black women since before the 1820 Seneca Falls Conference. But she put it all together and whacked people between the eyes with it so they could no longer brush it aside. And personal examples are the best way to do that, because no one can question them. It's happened to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm very pleased, Janice, that you think my book might be hitting people between the eyes about...
Of course. Why do you think you're on here, Heather? Yeah. Any more people with questions? It's getting there. You know, it's all very well for these people that get cups of tea brought to them.
Yes, we have.
Some of us. Kelly's found the book for £8.17. We could have an auction here. Just to answer one or two of the questions that people have asked earlier, yes, we are recording the webinars. We have found a wonderful volunteer now who's going to take charge and get it all up on YouTube, which is what we need. We're going to finish in a minute, so your last questions, please think of them. We'll put them in the chat now. Just to tell you what's happening next, nothing's happening next week. We're having a week off. Our next webinar with our Objectinar is on the 25th of October, when we have a very different hidden voice. Some of you may have heard of Ali B. She is the East of England singer-songwriter who has written a lot of music and about transgenderism and the problems with it. Some of it very direct. She's the person who wrote the verse that got Harry Miller into trouble. If you remember, Harry Miller, an ex-police officer, part of Fair Cop, had the police round after he wrote what they refer to as a limerick online. And it turned out that was a verse of Ali B's song. Now, Ali B was never actually come into the public eye as a result of this, so we feel she is a hidden voice. I think Harry might have been going to mention her when he went on one of his TV programs, but I don't think she ever got mentioned. So please get in touch, Harry Miller, if you'd like to put us right on that. But we're going to have Ali B on to tell us about what happened and to tell us about her music. So do please join us for that on the 25th of October. that's our next one. We've got another one planned after that, which I'll tell you about next time. Do please get in touch if you'd like to help us with our crusade against objectification, to link up all the issues, and also with our surrogacy consultation. Thank you for the people who got in touch last time. You are now on our list to get a copy of the consultation. Surrogacy is the issue that all the defeated trans activists are moving on to when they feel they have to give up the fight for transgender rights, now that the government has changed its plan. So do please get in touch. We really need to gather women's voices on surrogacy, because there's some very, very nasty things going to happen to vulnerable women if the law gets changed on this. If you'd like to donate to Object, please feel free. We've got our details up on our website. Thank you very much for one or two people who have donated to us. Final check for questions and hands up.
Yes, we do have.
Yes.
Christina's been waiting for a little while.
Christina,
so
let's have you in. Yes, go.
Okay, I really just wanted to say something about this collective experience that we're having as women. I've worked in the field of domestic abuse for 20 odd years and trauma. And I'm very aware personally from my own experience of domestic abuse and regarding what's happening at the moment, that it very much fits with power and control in how we would identify perpetrators of domestic abuse. And I think that's what's so painful in, my experience. I've retired from working with trauma at the moment to take care of myself. But what I realised was I was re-experiencing, being re-traumatised by the gaslighting, the abuse, the threats, the being told to shut up, the threats of rape, and no one coming to say stop. No authority, no support at all. And I think collectively and individually, and I can speak to myself personally and having spoken to many other women, to be able to hear your voices today and that of the other women on this webinar just helps me stay sane. And I am a strong woman, I've been out there, I've headed up so many initiatives around children, young people, victims of domestic abuse, coercive control, 100% there. This has hit at the core of me, the very core of me being a woman. And I think that is what we're experiencing, societal gaslighting of everything about who we are instinctively. And I don't need to reiterate anymore. I know that this can be heard, but I think it's really important to highlight that this is a re-traumatization. And that every newspaper, every paper, everywhere you look, it's being reiterated that we need to shut the fuck up and let men take over our space. And do you know what? That is a fucking hill I'll die on, because I haven't
we'll be right next to you.
58 years of, to be 58, having worked in the field for all these years and fought so hard for women and girls and boys, children, to stop abusive men infiltrating our spaces, our lives, our bodies, to abuse and to make them feel okay. Absolutely. So thank you today, because this has meant so much. I feel I can hang on to sanity another week.
And thank you. We are not having it either. We're going to end on that important note. Stephanie and Heather, could you please look in your email for a Zoom? We'd just like to have a debrief in a few minutes. Normally we arrange this beforehand, but we're all a bit 6s and 7s today. So please come back on the Zoom in a few minutes. Rebecca will send you a link and we can just talk over how it all went. If anyone would like to come on our mailing list and find out more about our work or help with our work, go on the website www.objectnow.org and contact us. And thank you all for being here. We hope you'll be with us on the 25th of October when we talk to Ali B. Have a nice afternoon, everybody. Enjoy that cup of tea.
Did we do well, my darling girls? Did we really do well? We grew you up to be straight and strong, to do your best to know right from wrong. But we grew you in this awful world, a world that's hard and tough for girls. And part of your strength was to take it and make it okay. But it's not okay, my darling girls, in this fucked up, muddled up